The most frightening idea is not that reality is fake. That is too clean. A fake reality still has structure. It still has a designer, a system, a hidden room behind the visible room. Simulation theory is disturbing, but it is also strangely comforting because it turns existence into architecture. If the world is a simulation, then somewhere there is hardware. Somewhere there are rules. Somewhere there is an outside. But what if there is no outside? What if reality is not a prison you are trapped inside, but a process that keeps producing both the prison and the prisoner at the same time? That is where the fear begins, not with a computer, with the possibility that the solid world was never solid, and the self looking at it was never as separate as it felt. For years, the internet treated simulation theory as the ultimate modern nightmare. The world might be rendered. Your memories might be data. The sky might be a screen. The people around you might be programs. It was philosophy rewritten as science fiction. And it worked because it gave a familiar shape to a very old anxiety. The fear that reality is not what it appears to be. But the deeper you follow that fear, the less the simulation metaphor explains. It starts to feel too human, too mechanical, too easy. It imagines reality as something built the way we build things. Code, server, interface, user. Secretly flatters us by placing human technology at the center of the cosmos. The stranger possibility is not that reality is made of code. The stranger possibility is that reality may not be made of things in the way the mind wants it to be. Modern physics has spent more than a century making the world less intuitive. Matter stopped looking like tiny solid objects. Particles became excitations in fields, probabilities, interactions, measurements, relationships. At the scale where common sense breaks, reality does not behave like a room full of furniture. It behaves more like a set of events, becoming definite only through contact. This does not mean consciousness magically creates the universe in a simple movie way. That would be too easy. It means something more unsettling. The properties we call real may not exist as private, finished facts waiting in isolation. They may arise through relation. A thing is what it is in contact with other things. That sentence sounds abstract until you apply it to yourself, because the self also feels like a thing, a person, a center, a witness, someone inside the skull, watching the world happen. Most of ordinary life depends on this feeling. You wake up, remember your name, look through your eyes, move your hands, answer messages, make plans, and assume there is a stable owner behind the experience. But neuroscience keeps making that owner harder to locate. The brain does not appear to contain a little person watching a screen. It builds models. It predicts sensation. It edits perception. Before awareness arrives, it turns scattered signals into a usable world, and then places a sense of self inside that world, as if the self had been there first. The self may be less like a soul sitting in a body, and more like a process the body-brain system keeps generating, because it helps the organism survive. That is useful. It is also terrifying. Because if the self is a process, then it is not a fixed object. It is something maintained, something refreshed, something vulnerable to interruption. This is why derealization and depersonalization can feel so horrific. The room is still there. The hands are still there. The voice still works. Nothing supernatural has entered. But the invisible glue that makes experience feel owned begins to loosen. Reality looks flat, distant, staged. The body feels operated rather than inhabited. The person is not gone, but the feeling of being a person has become unreliable. That is a quieter nightmare than monsters. A monster attacks you from outside. This removes the position from which you would be attacked. The scariest part of consciousness is not that it might be trapped in a simulation. It is that consciousness may never have been the clear, private chamber we imagine. It may be open, relational, unstable, and dependent on processes we do not control. The mind wants a border, inside and outside, observer and observed, self and world. But many of the strangest ideas in physics, neuroscience, and philosophy keep damaging that border. Not always in the same way, not always with the same evidence, but with the same emotional result. The world becomes less like a collection of objects and more like a living web of relations in which the observer cannot be cleanly removed. That is where cosmic horror becomes intimate. Traditional cosmic horror says the universe is too large and indifferent for the human mind. But this newer dread says something worse. The universe may not be sitting across from you. You may be one of the ways it is appearing to itself. That sounds mystical, if said gently. Said another way, it is horrifying, because it means the thing you call me might be a temporary pattern inside something too vast to have a face, not a soul in a machine, not a player in a game, a local event in an unknowable process. The simulation story lets you imagine, escape, wake up, remove the headset, find the programmer, break the system. But if reality is relational all the way down, there may be no backstage, no final layer where everything becomes simple. Every attempt to step outside reality may only create another relation inside it. You do not escape the web by noticing the web. Noticing is part of the web. This is why observation is such a powerful horror concept. In ordinary horror, being watched means danger. Something sees you. Something knows where you are. But in deeper reality, horror, observation is not merely surveillance. It is participation. The act of looking is not passive. It changes the situation. At the quantum level, measurement is not just peeking at a finished object. It is part of how certain facts become definite. Again, this does not mean your eyes control everything, but it does destroy the childish picture of reality as a completed stage waiting for a viewer. Reality may be less like a stage and more like a conversation. And conversations have no single object that contains them. They exist between participants. Now imagine that applied to existence itself. The terror is not that the world is unreal. The terror is that real may mean something far less solid than we need it to mean. A chair is real because of interactions: light, touch, resistance, memory, language, usefulness. Your body is real through sensation, metabolism, perception, response. Your identity is real through continuity, recognition, habit, social reflection, and narrative. These things are not nothing, but they are not the isolated, permanent objects the frightened mind wants. They are patterns, and patterns can dissolve. That is the horror underneath this topic. Not fake reality, unstable reality, not illusion as trick, illusion as construction, not a lie imposed from outside, but a world continuously assembled from signals, relations, and predictions. The brain already proves this every day. Color is not sitting in objects the way paint sits on a wall. The brain constructs color from wavelengths and context. Sound is not a little object flying through the air. It is vibration interpreted as experience. The solid image of the world is stitched together from fragments, blind spots, expectations, and corrections. You do not experience reality raw. You experience reality rendered by biology. But rendered does not mean fake. That is the trap. A hallucination can be false. A perception can be useful. A memory can be distorted. A self can be constructed. None of that makes experience meaningless. It makes experience stranger, because the thing you rely on most is also an active fabrication. The mind does not show you the world as it is. It shows you the world in a form you can survive. Horror begins when survival format starts to glitch. A hallway feels too long. A face feels almost human. A mirror reflects the body with a delay that cannot be proven. A familiar room loses emotional temperature. Your own voice sounds like someone else's recording. The world has not visibly changed, but the relationship that made it yours has weakened. This is why uncanny horror works so well with these ideas. The uncanny is not the impossible. It is the almost normal after trust has been damaged. It is reality, with one layer of ownership removed. You recognize the room, but not the feeling of being in it. You recognize your body, but not the certainty that you are driving it. You recognize your memories, but not the person they are supposed to prove. A simulation can be frightening, but it still makes reality into a mystery with a solution. The uncanny makes reality into a relationship that can fail while everything remains visible. That failure is much harder to escape, because if reality is a relation, then fear is not only inside you. Fear is one of the ways the relation changes. A dark room is not frightening only because of its physical properties. It is frightening because your nervous system, memory, imagination, and the room's sensory information enter a pattern together. The horror is not in the room alone. It is not in the mind alone. It is between them. Between may be the most disturbing word in philosophy. We want things to be located: evil in the monster, truth in the object, self in the body, meaning in the sentence. But the deepest things often exist between neurons, between bodies, between observer and observed, between memory and sensation, between language and silence. The self may also live there, between the body and its model, between memory and prediction, between what others recognize and what you privately feel, between the world touching you and the mind saying, "This is mine." If that is true, then the self is not a hidden jewel. It is a negotiated event. And negotiation can break down. This is why the fear of losing your mind is so much worse than the fear of being wrong. Being wrong preserves the person who discovers the error. Losing your mind threatens the discoverer, makes the witness unstable. It asks, who is left to know that something has gone wrong? Reality horror reaches its strongest form when it attacks the witness, not the world, the witness. Because once the witness is unreliable, every reassurance becomes suspicious. Maybe the room is normal. Maybe the body is fine. Maybe the memory is accurate. Maybe the thought belongs to you. But the word maybe has already done the damage. The reference point has started to move. This is why people are drawn to videos about simulation, consciousness, quantum reality, and the self. The topic gives intellectual permission to approach a private fear. Most people will not say, sometimes existence feels unreal, and I do not know what I am. But they will click a video asking whether reality is a simulation. The title becomes a safe doorway into unsafe feelings. That is the key. The best modern reality horror does not begin with aliens or machines. It begins with a sentence that feels like a thought the viewer has had at 3 a.m. What if this is not what I think it is? What if I am not what I think I am? What if the feeling of being real is something that can weaken? From there, the horror does not need to prove a conspiracy. It only needs to deepen the doubt, not with random confusion, but with a clean descent. Matter becomes relation, perception becomes construction, self becomes process, and reality becomes something you participate in without fully understanding. Each step removes one comfort. Matter is not solid, perception is not raw, memory is not perfect, self is not fixed, observation is not outside. There may be no final outside. By the end, the viewer should not feel informed in a simple way. They should feel slightly less able to stand where they stood before. That is the improvement this channel needs. Not broader topics, sharper existential hooks. The viewer should know within 5 seconds what private fear the video is touching. Basements are not about basements. Mirrors are not about mirrors. Body horror is not about gore. Simulation is not about computers. The strongest episodes translate objects into psychological threats. Basements mean the home has a buried unconscious. Mirrors mean the self can become alien. Body horror means the body can betray ownership. This episode means reality may not contain a stable you at the center. That is a dangerous promise. And if the video keeps that promise, people stay. Because the topic is not merely philosophical, it is personal. Everyone has had moments when the world looked staged, memory felt thin, or the body moved through a day while the self lagged behind. Everyone has felt the strange delay between being alive and understanding what being alive is. Most of the time, we cover that delay with routine, work, screens, food, messages, sleep, repeat. Routine is a reality stabilizer. It tells the mind, do not look too closely. But horror is the art of looking too closely. And when you look closely enough, the ordinary world becomes impossible. A face is a moving biological surface, pretending to be identity. A voice is air shaped into meaning. A thought appears from nowhere and claims to be yours. A memory edits the past while pretending to preserve it. A room becomes real only through sensation, attention, and trust. Nothing needs to be fake for everything to become strange. That is the final reversal. The simulation question asks whether reality is artificial. The better question asks why reality ever felt natural. Because natural is not a property of the world. It is a feeling produced by familiarity. When familiarity cracks, reality does not become fake. It becomes exposed. Exposed reality is not clean. It has no simple objects, no permanent self, no untouched observer, no outside, where the fear can be placed safely away from us. There is only experience happening, interpreting itself, stabilizing itself, doubting itself, and calling the temporary result a world. Maybe that is why the simulation theory became popular. It was a way to make this terror manageable. A machine is easier to imagine than a reality with no final floor. A programmer is easier to fear than a universe where observer and observed are tangled from the beginning. A fake world is easier than a real world that is stranger than fake. So no. The most frightening possibility is not that you are inside a simulation. It is that you are inside a reality that does not need to be simulated to be unstable. A reality where the self is not a passenger, but a pattern. Where the world is not a finished object, but an event. Where looking is not outside the mystery. Where the thing asking the question is part of the question. And if that is true, then there may be no curtain to pull back, no final reveal, no clean awakening, only the slow recognition that the world was never merely around you, and you were never merely inside it.